One scientific phenomenon that we hear a lot about is the butterfly effect. It's this thought experiment about how everything that happens is the result of a near-infinite, logarithmic in complexity string of events. For example, J.D. Salinger's 1951 book, The Catcher in the Rye, set into motion several things that would eventually create the incredibly influential band.
Sonic Youth?
Sonic Youth.
Sonic Youth.
Sonic fucking Youth.
Sonic Youth was an experimental band formed in New York in 1981. They have a lot of albums under their belt. Some of them were critically acclaimed masterpieces, some great albums with less critical acclaim, and some on the shallow end of the great pool of quality. Regardless, I believe that one of the biggest influences on Sonic Youth's body of work was The Catcher in the Rye. Sonic Youth have always been fascinated by the taboo. They made songs criticizing religion during a time where it was widely frowned upon to do so. They made an entire album about Charles Manson, and they heavily used the word fuck in their song Flower so that it wouldn't be played on the radio. When Sonic Youth was in its formative years, The Catcher in the Rye was becoming increasingly banned and challenged. In 1981, it was the most censored book in schools in the United States, making it incredibly attractive to the taboo-loving Sonic Youth. The band also hails from New York City, the same city in which much of Catcher takes place. A lot of the issues in New York that influenced Catcher were also heavily influential on the scene from which Sonic Youth was born. No Wave was largely a reaction to the feeling of phoniness and anti-creativity in rock music at the time. No Wave musicians felt as though the same tropes and musical style was being regurgitated again and again and again in new wave music and in New York City rock in general. This emotion is similar to how Holden feels about the people in New York City, and really just people in general. He feels like most of them are unauthentic, and so he deliberately decides to do the opposite of the tropes that he observes, much like how No Wave was the logical opposite to popular rock at the time. The influence of Catcher can clearly be seen in Sonic Youth's lyrics as well. For example, the band's most popular track, Teenage Riot. This song is the band's most popular track, and for phenomenal reason. It is relentless but playful, and it has a catchy tune, it's fun to sing along to, it's just the perfect formula for a hit. I see the song as less of a serious take on the themes of Catcher in the Rye, and more of just like a fun take on them. The same general angst is there, but without a lot of the pessimistic undertones. The song features the line, This sentiment perfectly reflects that of Holden Caulfield throughout the whole book of Catcher in the Rye. Thurston Moore, the band's vocalist and primary songwriter, is expressing a feeling of distrust and perceived inadequacy in most members of the human race. It implies that most people are so phony and incompetent that they can't use any critical reasoning, or even do something as basic as opening up a map. This lyric has many a parallel in Catcher. For instance, on page 151, where Holden is calling Carl loose, he says that he did this in hopes of having a slightly intellectual conversation. And he's implying that the majority of people are incapable of intelligent conversation and critical thinking, much like the Teenage Riot lyric. But Teenage Riot isn't the only song with Catcher-esque lyrics. There's a darker track in the band's catalog that could have been written by Holden Caulfield himself. The song is called This is a track off the band's second LP, Bad Moon Rising, the aforementioned album about Charles Manson. Well, that might be an exaggeration. Bad Moon Rising covers many topics that were in the young American psyche at the time, sort of like Catcher. The third track, Society as a Whole, is probably the least nuanced, but it also has the most influence from Catcher. Here's a lyric-by-lyric analysis of how the song is related to Catcher. This is a pretty decent summary on Holden's broader thoughts on society. Much like Thurston Moore, Holden sees society as being inherently bad because of certain aspects of it, such as maybe salary or politics that make him lie to his friends, the very people that he's supposed to be able to confide in. This is the part of the song in which Thurston Moore is expressing his belief that his friends' egos have become inflated from society, possibly from being placed in positions of power. This is similar to Holden's view of DB, since he thinks that he sold out and became a prostitute in Hollywood. A lot of people who criticize society are written off as being immature or not fully grasping how it works, but Sonic Youth are saying that they understand how society works, but that they still dislike it. This is essentially the same view as Holden Caulfield, who clearly understands social hierarchy, but still thinks that it's disingenuous. Here, Moore is talking about religion with the holy noise line. Holden expresses similar distaste for organized religion throughout the book. My Friends Are Girls Wrapped in Boys reflects Holden's idea that people his age are too preoccupied with dating to think intelligently. If you recall earlier parts of the book, Holden resents Stradlater for going out with so many girls that it impacts how Holden interacts with him as a friend. We're living in pieces. I want to live in peace is a pretty cheesy and generic anti-society line, but I mean, it sums up Holden's view pretty well. He feels as though society is broken and fragmented by phoniness, and he wants to see a world where he can live in peace and children never grow up, which is a goal that he'll never achieve because, after all, in the end, I think that it's safe to say that Holden Caulfield would majorly approve of Sonic Youth. They represent a rebellion against the culture of New York. The group also shares Holden's pessimistic views on society, which is certainly something he'd appreciate. Finally, their musical style in general is the opposite of what was popular at the time The Catcher was written. The rejection of that kind of music would have killed Holden. Overall, The Catcher in the Rye certainly influenced Sonic Youth a great deal.